Welcome everybody. In this video I will show you how to destroy the King's Indian defenses in 2024. Let's go. D4, and I will teach you also a bunch of other stuff. So stay tuned. Knight to C3. And here we play the move E4. In this kind of positions, black gives white the center, but instead he can castle now and already has his king castled in a very safe way with a fianchetto bishop, and will prepare to target the center at some point. And white here plays the move f3. This is a sideline I recommend to you to play. Why is this f3 move so good? Well, you have the following idea. You go with your knight here, your bishop here. The queen goes behind the bishop. You go g4, knight on g3, and you have a crazy attack, h4 as well. It's a super nice setup. And you can also use this setup in the Nimzo Indian attack. I also have a video on this, so check it out. Here, my opponent plays the move d6, preventing the progress of the e-pawn. But now we simply develop knight g to e2. It looks a bit awkwardly placed, maybe blocking the bishop, but we want this knight out first, so we can play the move g4 and put our knight behind the pawn. And in this kind of position, black wants to break either with e5 or c5, depending on the type of position the opponent likes. I've also created a video on the c5 break in the King's Indian attack and how to handle that, but here my opponent plays the e5 break, so we will show how to play against that. And here black asks white questions. What is the best move? Do we take? Do we progress? Do we just develop? Well, if you progress and black retreats his knight, and here black goes for the f5 break, trying to open up the f-file. And this is exactly the kind of game black wants with the knight on c5 as well. So I don't like that option. Taking is also not best, because if it takes, then the rook is on a strong file and the knight doesn't have a lot of good squares. Maybe we'll go here, but then also looks against the g6 pawn not favorable. So instead I decide to defend the pawn with bishop to e3. And if black were to take, then we can simply take back. And after c6, we bring the queen forward, going for the battery setup, maybe castle long, g4, h4, and forward we go. And this is a sample line how it can go. White already has a lot of space, a great setup, the pieces are well coordinated, and white has a slight advantage here. So black didn't take and played knight to c6. But we decide to play the queen to d2, setting up the battery, and if takes, well then it ends up in a position like this, where the bishop is countering the strong black bishop. And still, long castles, bishop here, and g4 and h4 are great options. So I don't mind the pawn being taken, but my opponent makes a mistake here, rook to e8, hoping that I will take, or that my opponent will take at some point. But do you see the best move for white here? Basically disqualifying rook to e8, yes, d5. Locking up the position. And now the black rook looks at its own pawn. And the knight needs to move. The best move would be to go to an active square here. And for example, after knight g3, the pawn is protected. The knight is a bit out of the game. White is better. But my opponent went back, which is quite passive. And he would love to have his rook here to help this f-pawn from progressing as soon as the knight moves. Okay, we played the move f3. Our pieces are lined up beautifully. How do we progress? Do we go h4 first? Do we go g4 first? Or do we castle? Well, we first start pushing some pawns. Not the h-pawn, it's an option, but then this locks up the position quite well. It's not what we want. And after castles, you know, black might start to think about pushing on the other side of the board. So we go g4. And after h5 takes, we have quite a good position. Knight g3. You don't want to trade as black, because then I get an open h-file right for the rook. So going to f4 would be good, and we don't really want to take here, because then this bishop gets active. b5 is a move, c6 is a move, and yeah, this position is not really good for us with the rook on the e-file. Not what happened. My opponent went back with the knight, a very passive move, probably trying to go for the f5 break. But here I play the move knight to g3, also eyeing on the f5 square, and f5 doesn't seem to be a good option now. Knight going to c5, it's a good move, but You know, it doesn't do a whole lot. My pieces are positioned very well. My pawns are protected. So going back to a principle of the middle game, making sure your pieces are centralized. I have a great center. My bishop is good. My knight is good. My queen is good. And this knight also has a lot of future. Only this bishop is still to be developed. And I need a castle, but there's no real urgency here because the position is quite closed. Here we go, h4. And as the saying goes, if your opponent attacks on the side of the board, you have to break in the center of the board. Well, my opponent cannot really break on the center of the board, but f5 is an option and my opponent decides to play it. If only the rook were on f8, supporting this break, that would have been way stronger. Not the case. That's why this rook was misplaced already early on in the game. We take, and here there are some options. Knight h5 is the best move according to the computer. And f4 is not an option because then we simply take the knight and get the queen in. And with the queen here, the rook here, you cannot really protect the bishop. And this is winning for white. But I went for a different sequence. First, get the bishop out, pinning the knight so it cannot join the defense for now. And after rook to f8, we play knight to h5, eyeing on the bishop, still pinning this knight. And we will bring the pieces in, putting pressure on the g-file. My opponent goes forward with the rook to defend, but it's not the best move. It should have gone here to attack the knight and get rid of this pin, but then I would simply take, and then I have bishop to h6 and I win material here. But after rook to f7, we simply bring in the rook. Look at this open file. How is black going to defend it? That's a bit unclear. My opponent goes for this option, but now do you see a brilliant move in this position? Look at this pin of the bishop and only the bishop is in the way. We already attacked the bishop and can we strengthen this attack? Yes, bishop h6. We attack the bishop now 3 times and black cannot protect it once more. Black brings the knight in between and now we simply take the bishop. We attack the queen, take back. We take the rook and after queen takes, what is the best move in this position? Do you see the great pin here on this file on the knight? Yes, h5. We simply make use of the pin and we will win the rook after we were already material up, right? Black tries to go for some counterplay. It's always good, so when you're behind, when you're in a worse position, try to go for counterplay in the center, at least try to create something, and that's what my opponent does and tries to do here. Takes the pawn, and I could have taken the knight here, but I decide to simply take the pawn back first, as this pin is still alive. There is no urgency. My opponent takes the knight and I take back, and still this pin is alive. Even if the queen were to move, this pin is still alive. So after queen to e7, I decide to castle first. If I would take, then my opponent gets some counterplay with queen here. And I need to defend a bit. This is still completely winning for me. But why allow it? When I simply can castle first, and in this position my opponent resigned. So keep these principles in mind. Try f3 yourself. I think it's a very good option, and get those g and h pawns forward and rooks behind it and overpower your opponent. Good luck and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you!